Imagine this, his body trembling on the edge, his breath uneven, his control slipping away, and in that exact second, the words you choose to whisper have the power to either make it unforgettable or make it forgettable. When you lean in close and let your voice spill into his ear at that delicate edge between control and surrender, your words have the power to intensify everything he is feeling. The sound of your voice, the tone, the rhythm of your breathing, even the way your lips brush against his skin, all combine to heighten the sensations racing through his body. It is not just about what you say, it is about how you say it. A whisper is not only softer than speaking, it feels more intimate, more secret, and when someone is at their most heightened state, that secret between the two of you becomes explosive. The right words in that moment act like fire on gasoline, igniting something deeper and rawer than just physical pleasure. Desire thrives on stimulation, and stimulation is not limited to the body. The mind is the true epicenter of arousal. When you whisper something that confirms his fantasies, encourages his performance, or teases his imagination, you tap into a dimension of pleasure that cannot be reached through touch alone. Imagine his heart pounding, his body already straining at the brink, and then your voice enters that storm, guiding, affirming, or daring him to let go. The sound of your breath and the softness of your tone become inseparable from the sensations in his body, and suddenly climax is not just an inevitable release, but a deep connection laced with meaning. It is important to realize that in those seconds before climax, a man is hyper-aware of every sound and every shift in energy. Words cut through the fog of pleasure with startling clarity. If you tell him what he is doing to you, if you confess how good it feels, or even if you whisper something as simple as his name with raw hunger, it imprints itself onto that experience. Long after the moment is over, he will replay those words in his mind because they were tied directly to his highest state of physical ecstasy. That is why your words are so powerful. They anchor memory to sensation and sensation to desire. The effect of whispering at that instant goes far beyond the bedroom. It creates association. He begins to crave not only the physical release, but also the emotional intoxication that comes with your voice. Your words become a drug in his system. He remembers the way your lips brushed his ear, the way you moaned something only he was meant to hear, and he wants more of it. He does not only want the act, he wants the entire experience that only you deliver. That is the kind of influence that builds obsession and loyalty. There is also a psychological factor at play. At the edge of climax, vulnerability is at its peak. In that moment, he is surrendering control, and the words you give him can either strengthen that surrender or pull him deeper into connection with you. A whisper that validates his power over you, or conversely, one that takes control of him, becomes the final push that tips him over the edge. The beauty of this lies in its versatility. You can choose whether your words are gentle, affirming, commanding, or teasing. Each tone changes the nature of his experience. What makes the whisper so unique is that it bypasses logic and dives straight into instinct. The vibration of your voice travels through his body in ways he cannot control. The closeness of your mouth to his skin reminds him of intimacy. The secrecy of the words tells him this is yours alone, a private world no one else can touch. When he hears you, he is not just hearing words, he is hearing your desire, your surrender, your dominance, or your approval. That becomes unforgettable because it attaches emotion to pleasure, and when those two meet, desire becomes unshakable. Anticipation is the silent force that turns an intimate moment into an unforgettable experience, and nowhere is it more powerful than in the seconds before climax. The human mind craves what it cannot immediately have, and that craving builds pressure in ways that the body alone cannot achieve. When you hold back just enough, when you tease with your words, when you guide his attention toward what is about to happen without giving it away too soon, you create a storm of desire that magnifies the release. Anticipation is not denial. It is the art of pacing, of dragging out the moment so that when it arrives, it does so with overwhelming intensity. In intimacy, people often rush toward the peak, eager for that final explosion of pleasure, but the truth is that the build-up is where most of the magic resides. Every pause, every whisper, every suggestive glance holds more weight when he knows something greater is coming but cannot quite touch it yet. Your words become a form of seduction that draws him deeper into the experience, keeping him guessing, making him feel as though he is chasing you even when you are right there in his arms. The longer you can hold him in that state of expectancy, the more intoxicating the final release will be. There is a primal psychology to anticipation. The brain releases dopamine not only when receiving pleasure, but also when expecting it. That expectation is a powerful drug, one that keeps him hooked to every sound, every touch, every breath you take. When you lean close and murmur something suggestive, when you hint at what you want but don't say it outright, when you tell him not yet, you are feeding that dopamine rush. His body responds as if the pleasure is already happening. His pulse races, his muscles tighten, and he is pulled into a heightened state where everything you do feels magnified. The beauty of using anticipation is that it allows you to control the pace of the experience without ever breaking the connection. You can tease with silence just as effectively as you can tease with words. A pause before finishing a sentence, a slow moan that trails off without revealing the end, or a soft laugh that suggests you know something he does not. All of these moments keep him suspended in desire. The uncertainty becomes its own form of seduction. He is not just waiting for climax, he is waiting for the permission, the signal, the whisper from you that unleashes it. That waiting builds intensity he cannot create on his own. Anticipation also adds depth to intimacy because it forces him to stay present. When you rush, the mind checks out and focuses only on the finish line. But when you slow down and play with expectation, he lingers in every touch and every breath. Your words anchor him to the moment. A subtle tease like "not yet" or "I love watching you lose control" does more than just arouse. It makes him feel that the experience is layered, meaningful, and unforgettable. He is no longer just moving toward release, he is surrendering to the journey you are guiding him through. The most intoxicating part of anticipation is that it makes the release not only more powerful, but also more emotional. Because he has been kept in suspense, when he finally reaches the peak, it feels like an achievement, something that you allowed rather than something that simply happened. That sense of being guided, of being pulled along by your teasing words and deliberate pace, creates an intimacy that lasts beyond the physical. Anticipation makes him crave not just the end, but the entire experience of being kept wanting, and that craving is what brings him back again and again. When someone is right at the edge of climax, their body is already alive with sensation, but what often gets overlooked is how much their mind is craving affirmation in that very instant. Affirmation is not simply a compliment or a kind word. It is the reinforcement that what they are doing is powerful, desirable, and utterly captivating to you. When you let those affirmations spill from your lips in the heat of the moment, it changes the nature of the release, because suddenly it is not just physical, it is deeply emotional. It is no longer about the mechanics of pleasure. It becomes about connection, validation, and intimacy tied together in one heightened explosion of sensation. The mind plays a critical role in arousal. Even when the body is at its peak, the brain is constantly scanning for signals of approval, desire, and significance. When you affirm him in that vulnerable space, you are giving his mind exactly what it craves most. whispering that he feels incredible, telling him how much you want him, or even moaning his name in a way that conveys admiration. All of these are affirmations that reach into his psyche. The result is a climax that is not just a release of tension, but an experience that feels deeply rewarding and unforgettable. Affirmation intensifies release because it dissolves insecurity. Even the most confident person has moments of doubt about whether they are truly giving enough, whether they are desired as much as they desire. In the silence of passion, those doubts can creep in, but your words erase them. When you affirm with sincerity, you are not just feeding his ego, you are grounding him in certainty. He knows in that instant that you are fully present, fully captivated, and fully consumed by him. That certainty creates safety, and safety allows complete surrender, which is what makes the release so much stronger. The beauty of affirmation is that it can take many forms depending on your natural energy. Some affirmations are gentle and loving, like telling him he feels amazing or that you never want him to stop. Others are raw and primal, like telling him he is driving you wild or that he is yours. Both kinds of affirmation fuel intensity, and both attach emotional weight to physical sensation. It is not about reciting perfect lines. It is about giving voice to what you are genuinely experiencing in the moment. Authenticity is what makes affirmation powerful, because when he hears your words and knows they are true, they sink into him and heighten everything. Affirmations also create memory anchors. The human brain stores moments of extreme pleasure alongside the context that surrounds them, and your words become inseparable from that memory. If you affirm him just before climax, those words fuse with the peak of his experience, and he will recall them vividly long after the moment has passed. This is why certain phrases, or even just the sound of your moan, can replay in his mind again and again, pulling him back into the memory of how good it felt with you. Affirmation, therefore, is not only about the present moment, it is about creating an imprint that lingers, one that makes him crave you beyond the bedroom. Another layer of affirmation is its ability to shift dynamics. When you express desire and admiration, you create a sense of importance in him. He does not feel like just a participant. He feels like the reason you are unraveling in pleasure. That significance magnifies his sense of fulfillment, and in turn, his release becomes more powerful. In many ways, climax is as much about meaning as it is about sensation, and affirmation is the bridge between the two. It elevates sex from something purely physical into an experience that feels deeply personal, almost spiritual. What makes affirmation so intoxicating is that it strengthens the bond between you. It tells him that his presence, his touch, his energy matters. It is more than arousal, it is validation at the deepest level, and when climax happens in that state, the connection feels unbreakable. Affirmation is the secret ingredient that takes a fleeting moment of pleasure and transforms it into a memory that lingers, a desire that grows, and an intimacy that deepens with every whispered word. Vulnerability is often misunderstood in intimacy because it is commonly seen as weakness, but in reality, it is the very thing that deepens pleasure and takes physical connection into a space that is emotional, raw, and unforgettable. When you allow yourself to be vulnerable in those moments leading up to climax, you are opening a door that transforms the experience. Vulnerability means revealing what you are truly feeling, what you crave, what you fear, or what you desire most without filtering it. And when that honesty comes through your voice or your body, it electrifies the connection between you and him. It is the courage to admit what turns you on, to confess what you want him to do, or to express how much he affects you in ways you might not say outside of that intimate space. That revelation is powerful because it shows him a side of you that is raw and unguarded, and in turn, it invites him to step into the same state of openness. In the rush of passion, people often hide behind performance. They say what they think they are supposed to say, or they act in ways they think will look good rather than what feels authentic. The problem is that this creates a layer of distance. Vulnerability erases that distance. When you let your guard drop and speak from an unfiltered place, you bridge the gap between bodies and emotions. If you tell him that you need him, that you cannot hold back, that he makes you lose control, those words are not polished or practiced. They are raw truths, and it is precisely their imperfection that makes them irresistible. They show him that you are not playing a role, you are fully immersed in the moment with him, and that authenticity heightens both of your experiences. Vulnerability before climax also amplifies intensity because it blends arousal with trust. To reveal your true desires, to admit that you are overwhelmed, or to surrender control requires trust, and that trust creates safety. Safety allows you to go deeper into sensation without holding back, without guarding yourself, without second guessing. When he feels that you are safe enough to be vulnerable with him, it ignites something primal inside him as well. He will want to give more, to please more, to push further, because he senses that he has access to a part of you that is not easily revealed. The connection becomes reciprocal, where his own vulnerability begins to show, and that mutual openness amplifies the pleasure for both. Vulnerability also makes climax more meaningful. The body can climax from stimulation alone, but the climax that comes when emotions are fully engaged is incomparable. When you allow yourself to be vulnerable and express what you truly feel, the release carries not just physical satisfaction, but emotional release as well. It becomes a letting go, a surrender not only of tension, but of fear, of self-consciousness, of restraint. That surrender is what makes the experience unforgettable, because it is not only about pleasure, it is about intimacy. The memory that lingers is not just of what was done, but of what was shared, and that memory carries a depth that simple physical acts cannot replicate. Another dimension of vulnerability is that it creates exclusivity. You may show confidence and composure to the world, but when you allow him to see the softer, unguarded side of you in those intimate moments, he feels chosen. He realizes that this side of you is not for everyone. It is a part of you reserved only for him. That sense of being trusted with your vulnerability strengthens his attachment, makes him crave more of it, and ties his desire not only to your body, but also to your emotional openness. It is this feeling of exclusivity that transforms a fleeting encounter into a bond that lingers long after. Ultimately, vulnerability before climax is about truth. It is about stripping away masks and showing what lies underneath desire. It is about letting him see you not as perfect but as real, and that realness is more intoxicating than any act of performance. When you reveal yourself without walls, the connection intensifies, the climax deepens, and the intimacy becomes something that feeds not only the body but also the soul. Ownership in intimacy is a force that can transform an encounter from something pleasurable into something unforgettable, because it taps into one of the deepest desires we all carry, the longing to be claimed and to claim in return. When you choose words that express ownership right before climax, you do more than arouse. You create an intensity that fuses passion with primal instinct. Saying something that declares he is yours, or that you belong to him, is not just playful language. It is a psychological trigger that heightens both surrender and dominance in the most electrifying way. The body is already at the brink of letting go, but when ownership enters through your words, the release feels bigger, stronger, and more meaningful. It becomes more than a physical act. It becomes an emotional declaration carved into the moment. At the edge of climax, his mind is hypersensitive. Every sound, every breath, every word you let slip carries weight. When you say something that claims him, whether softly whispered or boldly moaned, It seeps into his consciousness at the exact moment when he is most vulnerable and most open. That is why ownership at this time is so powerful. It ties his peak of pleasure to the feeling of being chosen, of being wanted so much that you have marked him with your words. This is not something he can easily forget because it becomes fused with one of the most intense physical sensations he can experience. Your voice becomes forever linked to his release, and your words become the soundtrack to his desire. Ownership can take many forms, and each brings its own kind of intoxication. Sometimes it is about dominance, using firm, commanding words that make it clear he is under your influence in that moment. Other times it is about devotion, declaring that you are his, or that no one else makes you feel this way. Both directions are powerful because they strip away neutrality and replace it with certainty. In a world full of ambiguity and hesitation, ownership is direct, bold, and undeniable. It tells him there is no question about what you want or who you want, and that clarity at the edge of climax makes the release far more explosive. There is also a primal element in ownership that speaks to the oldest parts of the human brain. We are wired to crave belonging and to crave the thrill of possession, and sex is one of the most natural expressions of that wiring. When you express ownership with your words, you tap into that ancient instinct. You make the experience feel not only erotic but elemental, as if something inside him has been claimed beyond logic or control. That is why ownership creates obsession, because it is not just about pleasure in the moment, it is about planting the idea in his mind that he is yours, that he cannot separate his desire from the thought of you. Ownership also fuels intimacy because it strips away doubt. When he hears you claim him or declare yourself his, he no longer questions his place with you. He feels assured, grounded, and important, and in that security, he is free to give more of himself. This freedom intensifies his release because it is not just physical surrender, it is emotional surrender as well. Your words create a space where he feels safe to let go completely, where he feels that what is happening between you is not casual but defining. The most intoxicating part of ownership is how it lingers long after the moment is over. The climax may pass, but the words stay. They echo in his memory, reminding him of the intensity of being claimed and of claiming in return. That memory pulls him back to you, craving the feeling again, craving the unique way you make him feel not just desired but possessed. Ownership before climax is not only about amplifying the pleasure in that second, it is about creating an imprint so deep that he carries it with him, making you unforgettable and the experience impossible to replace. The afterglow of intimacy is often thought of as something that happens once the peak has passed, a quiet moment where the body relaxes and emotions settle into warmth. But the truth is that the afterglow begins before the climax itself. What you say in those final moments shapes the way both of you feel when the intensity subsides, because the words you choose are not just heard in the moment, they are absorbed, stored, and carried into the silence that follows. The way you guide him with your voice before he lets go determines whether the experience ends as a fleeting physical act or as something that lingers, drawing both of you into a deeper bond. When your words are infused with passion, intimacy, and intention, they become the foundation of how the afterglow feels, turning it into more than a physical release and making it an emotional experience that lasts long after bodies part. Climax is the highest point of intensity, but it is also a transition, a bridge between arousal and tenderness. The mind in that state is wide open, receptive to meaning, and vulnerable to influence. If you whisper desire, affirmation, or declarations of connection right before that peak, his subconscious attaches those words to the release. The afterglow then becomes colored by whatever you gave him in that instant. If you told him he is yours, the afterglow will carry possessiveness and intimacy. If you whispered how much he makes you feel, the afterglow will be saturated with validation and closeness. The power of those words is that they do not vanish with the orgasm, they set the emotional temperature for what follows. The afterglow begins before the peak because anticipation and affirmation work as emotional anchors. When you build suspense with your words, when you affirm his effect on you, you are not only heightening the climax, you are also laying the groundwork for the connection that lingers afterward. He does not only remember the release, he remembers that you tied it to meaning, that you guided it with intention. The body cannot help but relax once the intensity has passed, but the mind replays what was said and what was felt, and that replay defines whether the afterglow feels like a simple fade into calm or a deepening of intimacy. Your voice becomes the thread that carries him through. As his body lets go, your words still echo, wrapping around him like a second skin. The afterglow is not silent, it is filled with the memory of those whispers, the tone you used, the truth you revealed. That memory keeps him close, both physically and emotionally, because it reassures him that what just happened mattered. Without words, the afterglow can be hollow, a descent into nothing more than tiredness. But with the right words, it becomes a descent into closeness, where the heat softens into tenderness and the connection strengthens instead of dissipating. The beauty of recognizing that afterglow begins before climax is that it gives you control over how the experience will be remembered. If you want it to feel passionate, you can frame it with desire. If you want it to feel deeply intimate, you can frame it with vulnerability. If you want it to feel wild and unforgettable, you can frame it with ownership. Each choice of words creates a different texture of afterglow, and he will carry that texture with him long after the physical moment ends. This is why what you say matters so much, because climax may be the peak, but afterglow is the memory, and memory is what fuels desire for the next encounter. What makes this so powerful is that afterglow is relational, not just physical. It is the time when bonds are cemented, when emotions are reinforced, and when desire is shaped into something that lingers. By starting that process before the peak, you extend the intimacy, stretching it beyond the limits of the act itself. The words you choose before climax become the emotional bridge that leads into the warmth of the afterglow, and that bridge ensures the experience is not only satisfying in the moment but unforgettable in the hours, days, and weeks that follow. In the end, what you say right before he climaxes is far more than a few fleeting words. It is the spark that defines the memory, the anchor that ties his release to emotion, and the reason he craves not just the act, but the connection with you. Whether it is the whisper that amplifies his desire, the tease that builds anticipation, the affirmation that validates his power, the vulnerability that deepens intimacy, the ownership that fuels obsession, or the intention that shapes the afterglow, every word becomes part of the story his body and mind will replay again and again. Pleasure may fade, but the imprint of your voice, your truth, and your presence in that moment will linger, making you unforgettable and the experience impossible to replace.